this idea of a method to acquiring or even mastering a certain skill is something that I think is really empowering. It kind of takes the power away from this idea of needing to have natural talent or, a really high level of intelligence to achieve the things you want to do. Well, as it turns out, that's really not the case.
Welcome to Better System Trader, the podcast to help systematic traders of all levels improve their trading. We'll give you loads of expert tips and practical advice on system design and validation, money management, trading psychology, and many other topics. Whether you're just starting out or a savvy systematic trader, we're here to help you improve your trading and find more success. This is Better System Trader with your host, Andrew Swanscott.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Better System Trader. This is episode number 83 and glad you could join us today. Last week, I finished reading a book called Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. And I really wanted to share a concept from that book with you today because it contains a model which can be used to really accelerate the learning process and has the potential to dramatically increase our level of expertise in a short amount of time, which I think has some excellent applications for traders. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? And we're going to also have a quick chat with a previous podcast guest as well, a very recent guest actually. And he's going to share with us how he has used this technique to rapidly accelerate the skills he uses in algo trading today. Now, I think a common approach whenever we want to learn something or even perhaps when we want to get better at something is to fully immerse ourselves in it. And most people tend to assume that if they keep working on something, they will automatically get better at it. But performance scientists have shown that's not necessarily what happens. A lot of people reach a certain level of competence and then they plateau. Others don't really progress much at all, and often the process can take a really long time. So I guess that leads to the question, is it possible to reduce the amount of time that it actually takes? Like, are there techniques that we can use to accelerate that process? Well, actually there are. And today we're going to talk about one called deliberate practice. And our special guest for today, who is going to explain exactly what deliberate practice is and how we can apply it to trading and other aspects of performance too, is Chris from Robot Wealth. So let's head over to my chat with Chris to hear more about deliberate practice and how we can leverage that to become better traders. Hi Chris, thanks for joining us again today. Now we're going to have a quick chat about deliberate practice. So can you start by explaining what is deliberate practice?
Sure thing, Andrew. Well, yeah, thanks for having me on the show again. So, look, deliberate practice is essentially a systematic approach to acquiring a new skill. So it requires things like, breaking a skill up into different subtasks and then systematically ticking each of those off in turn before moving on to the next one. It's typically quite opposite of what you would call passive learning. So if you're reading a textbook or an article or something like that, that's what I would call passive learning, where you may or may not absorb what you're actually reading. And what you often find is that when you're just reading something, you can come to a paragraph or a sentence that you don't really understand, but you can quite often just continue on reading with very little implication of that. Our brain tends to just skip over stuff that we don't really understand very deeply and continue on. Whereas if you're actually doing the things that you're reading about, you physically can't move past something that you're unable to do. So deliberate practice really tries to leverage that idea.
Yeah, it takes that understanding to the next level, I guess, when you start to apply these things.
That's exactly right.
Yep. So I was going to ask, why is it so important? I kind of answered my own question there a little bit, but perhaps you can touch on that a little bit more. Why is it so important to be a deliberate practice and to really be careful about what you choose and how you apply that?
Sure. Well, in my opinion, it's important because basically because of our the fundamental weaknesses that we have as humans. So I try to read quite a lot of psychology books. I just find it the study of how the brain works to be absolutely fascinating. And the one common theme is that humans, well, obviously we have a number of flaws, but one of those flaws is that we tend to gravitate towards things that we find simple or at the very least comfortable. And then obviously in order to acquire a new skill, you have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And it's something that we don't really do very naturally, and we don't really do very well. So it's kind of hard to sort of rely on your own, internal drive to do that. Much better approach is to set yourself up for success by taking a systematic approach to acquiring any new skill. And deliberate practice is just something that I've found works really well for me.
Okay, great. So let's get a little bit more into the application of this, because people are probably wondering how can I determine what I need to practice and how do I apply this to my life and also into trading. So how can traders use this concept to improve themselves?
Okay, well, maybe I'll just give an example from outside of trading,
Sure.
Because this is where I got it from in the first place. So I come from, in terms of my sporting background, I come from a rowing background. And obviously with rowing, it's a very particular sort of sport. It requires, several people to all be in tune throughout various phases of a stroke. And so what we would do as a crew in order to, synchronize what we're doing and really get the most out of our rowing was we would do things like break up the stroke into its each component parts. And then we'd work on one component of the stroke at a time, sometimes for quite a long time before moving on to something else. And, constantly reinforcing the stuff that we'd learned, but essentially taking that really systematic approach to breaking, a big task down into smaller tasks and then working on each of those subtasks individually and then putting it all together at the end. So that's kind of where I got the technique from, but I used it quite a lot when I was learning how to program. So I'd done a little bit of programming back in my university days and throughout my career, but certainly not, I didn't have the skills that I needed to do well at algo trading. So one of the first things that I did was try to teach myself to program, and I managed to do it in what I think was relatively short time. So I think I got to a pretty good level within only about 6 months of picking it up. And that was essentially because I adopted this deliberate practice idea, and it was hard work. Obviously, it requires some planning. So the first thing you need to do is sit down and think about all the different steps or subtasks that are involved in the skill you want to acquire, and then come up with a plan for ticking those off. And then sticking to the plan is also quite hard as well. But you can do that by, what worked for me anyway was that I tended to set up systems for myself. So again, we don't really, as people, we're not very good at, just setting a goal and then going along and achieving that goal. We kind of need to set up systems for ourselves to help ourselves succeed. And one of the systems I put in place for myself was that when I was learning to code, I would say, okay, I'm not having breakfast until I've gotten up in the morning and spent at least 1 hour writing and debugging my own code. And that worked really well for me. It basically got me into the habit of coding every day by tying this new habit that I was trying to form to one that already existed, and that was obviously having my breakfast. So, you don't have to do exactly what I did, but certainly find something that fits into your lifestyle and your existing habits. And that's probably the best advice I can give in that regard.
Yeah, so can you think of any other possible applications for traders out there and using this deliberate practice concept?
Yeah, I guess it's really just about whatever skill you think is going to help with your trading and then applying deliberate practice to that. So something that's close to my heart is machine learning, which we spoke about recently. Okay. When I was learning about all of that stuff, deliberate practice came in really handy for that. It's a perfect sort of topic to try to split up into small pieces and tackle. It's a very large topic, obviously, but if you split it up into small pieces and then tackle them one by one, it becomes a lot more manageable.
Okay, can you give us just a quick example of how you actually split that up into smaller pieces?
Sure. So machine learning is quite a big one. And what I would do now if I were doing it all over again, I'd probably start by learning, the fundamental mathematical techniques that come in really handy. So get really good at things like linear algebra. Obviously learn the programming stuff that you need to implement those algorithms. So whether it's Python or MATLAB or something else, obviously you need to tackle that part of the problem as well. Yep. And that's a big one. You can split that up into many different pieces as well. Another thing you might do is participate in some of those online data science competitions. There's actually not many of those that I would say are directly applicable to trading itself, but certainly they're applicable to getting some good experience with the application of these machine learning algorithms. And that's a nice place to get some deliberate practice too, because you're immediately part of a community that's giving you feedback on what you're doing. And that sort of feedback loop is one of the most important, or one of the things that will accelerate your progress more than anything else. A couple of other things about deliberate practice while I think of it too,
Sure.
is that, so I just touched on getting feedback, which is really important, it also requires a good deal of honesty on your behalf as well. So like if you're saying to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to code for an hour in the morning before I have breakfast. If you then go and surf the internet for 45 minutes and code for 15 minutes, you need to be honest with yourself and tell yourself, okay, I didn't actually code for an hour this morning, I only coded for 15 minutes. And that's a really easy habit to fall into as well, and something that, I'm bringing this up because I know this from personal experience. It's certainly something that I've done in the past.
Yeah, it's very easy to get sucked into social media and internet when it's there on your screen. So
it really is.
Yeah.
Can I also say, Andrew, that I find that this idea of a method to acquiring or even mastering a certain skill is something that I think is really empowering. It kind of takes the power away from this idea of needing to have natural talent or a really high level of intelligence to achieve the things you want to do. Well, as it turns out, that's really not the case. You really just need a system and some discipline, and both of those things can be learned. So to me, that's an incredibly empowering and comforting idea.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Now, I learnt about deliberate practice from the book Peak, but you haven't read that book. You've learned it from somewhere else. So where can you read more about deliberate practice?
So I've read about it in a whole bunch of different places over the years. People have probably read Malcolm Gladwell's material. One of his books, he popularised this idea of needing 10,000 hours to achieve expertise.
Yep.
And there was a lot of publicity around that after it was published. And the biggest critique of that was that, it's about so much more than just the hours. Those hours have to be quality. And one way to get that quality is deliberate practice. So I guess I got all my material about that stuff from all of the post-Gladwell material that was published on the internet and other places. One particular podcast that I listen to a little bit is Tim Ferriss's podcast. And I listen to that because he interviews some people who are at the top of their game from various fields. And a lot of those people talk about deliberate practice in one form or another. So, I take a lot away from what those people said. But yeah, you can find these ideas in almost any book about psychology. It's all over the internet. But yeah, particularly, people who are at the top of their game, I guess it's no coincidence that they're putting this stuff into practice.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful concept. So thank you very much for spending time with us today, Chris, on discussing deliberate practice and how you've actually used it. So I really appreciate that. Now, where can people find more from you?
If people want to find out more about me and what I do, you can take a look at my website, robotwealth.com.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I'll catch you later.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so thanks, Chris, for sharing that. I hope you found that interesting. I'm going to add some links to the books that we mentioned on the show notes page. So if you want to get those, head on over to bettersystemtrader.com/83, I think. Yep, 83. And you'll see some links there. And I do recommend that you check out the Peak book. Have a read of it. You might find some interesting things in there that you can actually use to accelerate your own performance, no matter what level you're currently at. Anyway, that's it for this week. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to Better System Trader.
Thanks for listening to the Better System Trader podcast. The next step is to head over to bettersystemtrader.com for more expert tips, practical advice, and exclusive content. Catch us next time for even more great ways to improve your trading here on Better System Trader.